You're listening to Bold Hearts, Big Moves, the show for female entrepreneurs who want it all: a thriving business, deep self love, and fulfilling relationships. I'm Erin Anderson, and each week we will dive into how to set stronger boundaries, make empowered choices, and show up in life and business with boldness, authenticity, and heart. Because let's be real, the money you make is directly related to the love that you have for yourself and the strength of your relationships. So if you're ready to lead with love and make those big moves with those bold hearts, let's dive in.
Hey, my loves, welcome back to another episode of Bold Hearts, Big Moves. So really excited about this episode today, about how healing trauma creates cash flow. And, I wanted to make sure that I come across really, really clearly and help you guys really understand why trauma can also be interrupting your cash flow and what to do about it. Because this is something that I feel like a lot, especially female entrepreneurs, because the world is actually so much more traumatic for us than it is for men. But this is something that I really wanted to explain clearly and articulately for you, because I feel like if if you can understand these principles and why trauma is something that we do absolutely have to remove and quickly in order for us to hit the next level in our business, then I feel like it helps you so much more. It helps you understand like what your next steps need to be, and how much quicker those glass ceilings that we seem to keep hitting can actually be shattered so we can go to our next steps. Okay? So let me kind of first and foremost say this, like, we know that creating cash flow in our business is something that takes consistent action. And again, action is created off of feelings and thoughts, right? And so when we're being super, super intentional with our emotions, kind of like with what I talked about last week, it can help us be very intentional in our actions, right? And in our thoughts. But oftentimes we have a consistent story playing in in the background of our mind, and we all have them. We all have them, unless if you've been somehow transfigured and twinkled off the planet. Everybody has some type of a trauma story that is creating a glass ceiling for them, right? And it's important for us to address what those traumas are to shatter those glass ceilings. And your subconscious is one of those constant things. Consistency is key, right, to creating consistent cash flow. But when your subconscious is consistently working against you and you're not even aware of it, because this is just what you've believed, this is the trauma that you've had, this is life for you, right? When that is going on in the background of your mind consistently, it also makes sense that your consistent actions are not going to match up with the result of a consistent cash flow. Okay? So what we're really doing when we're breaking ceilings is we're actually healing different traumas down deep inside of us. And we can, but we can easily self-sabotage too when we start noticing that ceiling. This is the point where we really want to step back for a second, listen to the emotion, and pay attention to what our thoughts are, and not taking any of it as truth. Okay? Because trauma doesn't equal truth. There can be lots of different types of traumas. Big ones, small ones, juicy ones, fat ones, the whole I'm going to go out and eat worms kind of a concept. But it doesn't matter what type of trauma it was. If you listen to your thoughts, you can almost always pinpoint what the trauma is. Okay? And again, remember that your emotions are there to help you understand or get your attention to what you're thinking, right? They are the reaction to get your attention. So start writing down like what you're thinking, what's coming out of you. This is why tapping is also so important and so incredible, is because as you talk it through and you tap on your nerve centers, it can shift your thought process and shift the trauma very quickly outside of your body. Another really good somatic practice besides tapping is also writing. Your eyes have to follow the direction and the linear aspect of your hand, and so it's a little bit like EMDR therapy for yourself. The pathway that you use your eyes in, especially when following trauma, not following trauma, but following the pen on a paper, right? Is incredible for also releasing trauma from the body. So, just a couple of aspects there, a couple little, tidbits, points to give you guys. But the whole reason why we start to self-sabotage when we get to that glass ceiling is something, because of trauma, is telling us that once we shatter that glass ceiling, we're not going to be safe. Something is wrong. And I'll give you an example. Like when I first decided I was going to go to six figures, one of the things that I realized is I had a lot of resentment. And that resentment, as I listened to it, was pointing to some of the way I felt towards my husband at the time. Our communication was not that great when it came to financial problems. And oftentimes I personally felt, and it doesn't necessarily mean this is true because my husband has a story too, right? But I felt overlooked, silenced, all of these things. In reality, that overlooking and that silence was really me not speaking up. Regardless of the way he responded, it was just me not speaking up, right? And not making sure that I was heard. And again, pointing out very, very clearly to my husband what these problems were and what the result of those problems would be if they continued. And, bless my husband's heart, he's worked really, really hard on a lot of these things. And so we're able to actually start talking. We started talking about our financial problems and our feelings about the finances and maybe why we were feeling that way. And instead of getting offended, we listened to each other. We took inventory and we said, okay, I can see how you would think that way. I need to make this adjustment and this adjustment. And oftentimes, just talking it out with each other, we could see in ourselves the adjustments that we needed to make. And so there became no need for offense. Because if we're getting offended by what somebody is saying, again, that is just simply something that we need to pay attention to. It doesn't mean that somebody has to agree with you. It doesn't mean that somebody has to affirm you. It doesn't mean any of that. Offense is something that you have to deal with. Otherwise, you will consistently feel offended in this life. And that's one of those trauma responses that can easily sabotage your business if we're constantly in a state of offense. So again, like, what is it that we need to do? What is it that we need to work on in order for us to not feel so offended? And maybe it is that we need to strengthen our voice, speak up and speak out, whether somebody likes it or not. And that's okay, right? But when we operate from a respectful place and we speak respectfully, but we speak the truth, right? It helps us to not feel that offense so much because we are at least making sure that what we need to say is being said, whether somebody likes it or not. Okay? That's very important, actually. It's really, really important. And it's one of the things that actually will start to break the trauma ceilings. So when we clear the trauma, the confusion, the judgment, the distractions, the mental clutter, it frees up space for inspiration and mental clarity. So this is why it's also really important that we clear up trauma in order to hit six figures. There is a version of you, a six-figure version of you. How is she feeling? How is she thinking? What is her experience? What is she experiencing right now? And we need to understand this person, because once we do, we shift, we unlock, and we become this next best version of ourselves, because it is the becoming of that self that creates the consistent cash flow. Okay. And again, also one more thing about trauma is it's not always a bad thing. Trauma can actually really unlock some amazing superpowers for us. One of the things that trauma has done for me is it's given me the ability to almost kind of like hyper listen to someone. And it's such an amazing thing that I use in my business, because I can almost tell people exactly what's going on in their subconscious if they want to hear it, right? If somebody comes to me and they're like, okay, what are my money blocks? And they start talking to me, I can almost tell them immediately what the money block is because they're saying it. But I'm really tuned to hearing these things. I'm tuned to hearing money blocks. I'm tuned to hearing relationship blocks. I'm tuned to hearing what their traumas are, even though they might not be consciously aware of it, because their subconscious language is going to point to it, right? My trauma, my own trauma has given me that gift. But it wouldn't have happened had I stayed in a state of trauma and self-judgment myself. When we learn from our emotions and we give ourselves space to understand like what our emotions are really, really trying to tell us, it is amazing how trauma starts to work in our favor. So I wanted to point that out to you too. So exploring behaviors stemming from trauma, such as procrastination, fear of rejection, underpricing, like these are some things that we really worry about, I think, sometimes as a female entrepreneur. How many times, and you can mentally raise your hand here, but how many times have we worried about overcharging someone, right? That was one of my greatest fears when starting my business. And even now, raising prices is a little bit like, oh, okay, right? But that's something that points to a a problem with, or like a money trauma, honestly. We need to take a look at our money boundaries if that's something that's popping up. Fear of rejection, that's something that happens a lot. Again, when you start any type of business, that means that we have to have visibility, and visibility opens us up to all kinds of judgment and all kinds of feedback, right? And this is where we have to have a really good listening boundary, right? And we need to really take a look and see, like, what is the fear there? Why are we feeling like all we're going to have is that rejection? In reality, businesses do work on acceptance, right? That makes sense. But rejection, again, can teach us some great things. There's procrastination, but there's also a thing where I think we as female entrepreneurs, especially if we're dealing with ADHD, where we have, ooh, this shiny new object and this shiny new object, and I want to do this and this and this and this and this and this. And so we kind of overtax and overburden ourselves, right? Like that's actually also a trauma response. And when we get into those trauma responses, oftentimes what ends up happening is our brain goes into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, right? And that in and of itself is going to create some problems with cash flow because cash flow doesn't come to us, at least not legally and ethically, if we're stuck in those modes, right? And so we tend to, if we're stuck in that, the next thought that we usually tend to have is, well, I guess this is not working. I was silly for trying to start a business. Business doesn't work for me. Money doesn't come to me, blah, 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 right? Or we can feel like my business is really, really, really hard. And I'm not gonna try to tell you that sometimes in business it is going to be challenging, especially when we're in that growth phase. But not all business needs to be challenging. It doesn't all have to be a hustle. We can create business in a very relaxed, very mentally stable and emotionally stable way. Um, and so when we regulate our nervous system through, things like somatic practices, listening to our emotions, getting help, right? Like this is part of the reason I have this podcast is to give you really dialed in excellent help. When we're starting to really understand like what it is our trauma and our feelings are trying to tell us, doesn't necessarily mean that the trauma is true. Is we got to look past what the thoughts are what the thoughts are there. If you kind of imagine like you're sitting in a court of law and you have your defense and your opposition, right? Um your prosecution. There we go. The prosecuting attorney and you have your defense attorney, right? It's also kind of a little bit like having a shoulder angel and a shoulder devil. You have two sides constantly working at you all the time, trying to say these things and trying to prove something to you. But in reality, you are the final judge. You can judge with the defense or you can judge with the prosecution, right? But in the end, what your judgment is what is going to create the result. And so we really need to take a listen to both sides. One side might be a little louder than the other, but in the end, it is true that you are the final judge when it comes to listening to the right things. When we start really listening to what's really going on in our own heads, right? And it might mean sitting down and writing it down, highlighting those keywords and phrases, right? Highlighting what really stands out to you and seeing maybe what your emotions are really trying to say. Again, it helps open up clear decisions and problem-solving opportunities. It helps you get a clearer vision of the six-figure you, right? If you're sitting here stuck in trauma, trauma isn't going to tell you what this next version is of you. It's not going to give you a very good idea, right? Another thing that I would also suggest doing is, again, you've got to work with the brain. This is the brain onboarding piece, right? You've got to sit down or schedule some time for yourself every day, especially if this is something that you personally are dealing with, to really envision this next version of yourself. And if all you can see is like all the things you have to do, giving yourself that time every single day And it doesn't need to be any more than 10 minutes, right? Eventually, your brain will start to empty and you'll be able to control it a lot better. I have people all the time like, oh, meditation just doesn't work for me. Or I get so distracted, or my brain goes off on these tangents. It's okay. It really, truly is okay. That is your brain actually sifting through stuff so it can get to the point that you're trying to create. And again, seeing this next version of you, this is one of the things that I had to see within myself. It wasn't easy at first, but eventually, as I took this time to consistently look into like this next version of me, it really helped me understand how that person operated, and I started using those keys to create this next version of myself, right? And I do this still to this day. So again, a lot of healing trauma, creating that consistent cash flow, is once you realize that creating a business, creating cash flow, creating clients, creating leads, all of these things, there are certain structures to it, but it really kind of boils down to healing the past you so you can go on to the next you, right? It is a trauma healing practice. And this is why so many entrepreneur women honestly don't act like a victim either. And it's because they're in this state of self-growth constantly. But sometimes they find themselves really, really stuck at a ceiling and they're not sure how to shatter that glass ceiling. And again, it comes back down to finding out what is really happening in the subconscious programming. So that way you can heal that and start creating the dream and the cash flow that you are looking for. Again, if you guys would love some help with that, if you'd love some help taking a look at your personal relationships, your professional relationships, your relationship with self, and your relationship with money, and seeing what are the constants there, seeing what are your keywords and what your subconscious is really telling you, please feel free to schedule a call with me. The link is in the description below. Go ahead and click on that link and we will have some time and go through what your money blocks are. All right, my loves. I hope you have a fantastic week. Next week, we are going to talk about rewriting your money story and healing emotional wounds. Okay? All right, my loves. I will see you guys next week. Bye.
All right, Boundary Boss babes. I'm super excited that you tuned in with me today. Make sure you tune in again next week as we chat about more Boundary Boss babe topics. We're going to get into so many other things about how to set boundaries with your business, how to set boundaries with your relationships, so you can truly have the time, the money, and the flexibility that you are seeking. So tune in next week. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Let your other boss babe friends know about it. And also, if you've got any questions, make sure you submit them into the podcast by clicking on the send us a text message at the bottom of the podcast description. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. See you later, boss babes.